In this video, we're going to talk about Smithy and errors. And specifically, we will get into HTTP as usual, and we'll get into some Smithy4s specifics for errors later in the video. But for now, we're just starting with plain Smithy, so I encourage everyone who's interested in Smithy to watch along. And yeah, let's get to it. So in the previous videos, I deliberately skipped on the topic of errors just because it's a kind of separate story that deserves more attention and a specific special video. So errors are something that can happen as a result of handling an operation. At least in standard Smithy terminology, that's what errors mean. And to do any kind of errors, at least errors that are specified in your Smithy specification, you need a structure shape for each error. So I'm going to define one, and let's just say we have a not found error. So not found, let's say weather or city not found error. In order for it to be an error, we will have to add some traits, but I'll just have the LSP tell me about it when I try. So let's say get weather raises one of these errors. So it has errors, city not found error. Now we get an error. It cannot be bound. Okay, we get, I'm just going to change our vocabulary here. I'm gonna say we get an issue when there's something wrong, because obviously we want to implement errors. So we have an issue from the Smithy LSP. The city not found error type cannot be bound as an error because it is not marked with the error trait. That's correct, we need error. And there are two kinds of errors. There's client and server errors. Not found is a client error. So that's what I'm going to say. This is just an enum trait, so we can only have these two values, client or server, nothing else. But there is an HTTP error trait, which is optional in here, which will tell us what code this error has. For example, this is going to be a 404. Let's see, I think the whole thing is just a number, yeah. Now, if I didn't have this, then a default error code is being used. For client errors, that's going to be a 400. For server errors, it's going to be a 500. And rules like these, if you want to learn more about this, this is all covered on this page of the documentation. I'll put this link in the description. But yeah, there's like a bunch of rules, sequences, like how to serialize a request, how to serialize the response, what happens when there's HTTP error. This is this rule, right? The 400 and 500. So I'm going to keep this HTTP error trait just because it makes sense for a not found to be a 404. And I will add like a reason, an optional reason, so that it's easier to raise this kind of error. Now I could stop right here, but I'll also want to define like an internal server error case, just because it's so frequent and can happen essentially anywhere. So I'm just going to copy paste here, and this is going to be a server error with a 500. So I could skip it, really. I could skip this HTTP error trait, but I'll keep it. And that's going to be internal server error. There's also going to be a reason, although we're not going to expose the actual reasons. Just a quick tangent. When you are developing an API and you have a 500, something happened internally. If you're a public API, for security, you might want to hide the reason and not actually expose like stack traces or error messages from upstream systems, just because they might contain some information that makes it easy for someone to attack you. So it's always a good consideration to, to just take a look and probably hide this thing from your user, especially in a public API. You can always log things. You can return a code of the error that happened so that someone can use that as a reference, and then you can like cross-reference these things, but just don't provide too much info. Let's add this to our operation. And now I'm feeling like, hey, I may want to have this in every operation of my service, and I have two operations. So let's try to do that. I've put this into my service and it actually doesn't complain. Is it just the lack of validation? No, it's a real thing. A service can have errors. And this is nothing else than add this error to all the operation in the service. It's maybe worth noting that we can also have HTTP bindings in errors, like HTTP header is absolutely fine because it's allowed on outputs, and HTTP payload would also work. So it's definitely worth knowing that you can do these things in your errors. I just checked, and the HTTP response code thing does not work in errors, so at least not by design of the Smithy spec and the Smithy IDL and model. So don't use it in errors unless you're like in the future and you have confirmed that it actually does work by design and not by accident. On the serialization side of things, like what does this actually do? Well, you've seen that we can do bindings, so something like an HTTP header in the response would be indeed a header. Everything else, it behaves just like in normal outputs, with the caveat of like, what happens if I have more than one type of error in an operation? When you're a client, you need some way to disambiguate on the response type so that you know which one you got. And in many cases, you can just use the status code. For example, it's very easy to tell in here, let's say in get weather, that it can only raise a not found or an internal server error. So it's a different status code every time. So that's easy. You can use this as your source of truth. But what if there are more than one errors with the same status code? Let's say we have another one with like a 2, and it's gonna be a 404 again. This could be a problem, right? And I don't have a great answer because it depends. It depends on the protocol. And in AWS protocols, there is a header discriminator which contains the name of the type so that you can use that to decode to know like which one you've got. However, if you're missing that, if you don't have this header, and it's the same situation with simple-res.json from Alloy, if you have a protocol that does not have this semantic, this extra header, then you're in bad luck. You have to try each message, each error type in some sequence. So it's kind of a best effort check. In this case, if you didn't have a header, you literally cannot tell the difference because they are structurally the same. There's just one member, and not only that, it's optional, so it may not even be there. If you had some more obvious differences, like reason, something like this, then now you can tell because one of these errors has that field and the other does not. So yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with. So it's an unfortunate consequence of this design, but I think it's a fair trade-off. And if you're working with principled protocols like simple-res.json, then you're fine. You can just use the header as the discriminator. And that's what the interpreters in Smithy4s do. So let's go to Smithy4s now. I will generate my code, and with some luck, we will not have to change anything to run. And that's correct, we can just run. So I'll go to my Scala file, and let's see. Well, nothing changed, right? Nothing changed because the errors are not part of the type signatures. And we'll get into that in a moment. That's kind of a dispute that has been going on in the Scala land for a couple of years now. Do we do typed errors or like explicit errors, or do we do like implicit errors through the throwable channel of I/O, or do we just throw, you know? And the way that Smithy4s does, it makes a choice in that dispute. It does untyped errors by default. By default. So if I want my service to fail, let's say in my get weather, I'll do a not found. But I'll do a not found if the city ID is not London. So if city ID value is London, then I'll do this I/O. Otherwise, I'll do I/O raise error, and the way to do it is I take the name of the error, city not found error, and I raise that. I may have to import it somewhere. Let's see. For some reason, Metals doesn't like to help me import things, but that's the error, and I can supply the reason. No such city, only London is available. And yeah, let's see how that works. Yeah, I sent 1, 2, 3, no such city, only London is available. So here's this header that's being used by AWS protocols. but Smithy4s uses X error type. You know, for compatibility, it specifies both, but this is the only one that you really have to look at with this simpler JSON protocol. That's the server side. We just raised one error, and it's also an untyped error. Now, how do I look at an operation like get weather and determine what errors this can raise? You can go to the super type here, and this is the generated code for my service. The error appears here. So there's input, error, output, and then some streaming parameters, which we're not gonna talk about for a long time. So yeah, get weather error is it. And ultimately you will reach one of these, so internal server error or city not found. These are throwables. They extend Smithy4s throwable, which is a throwable with a custom to string. But yeah, this is why IORaise worked. It wouldn't have worked with like a normal type like create city output because it's not a throwable. Now it works. That's how you raise an error. Now, how do you handle one? That would be the client side, right? So let's go to the client side, which I commented out in the previous video, I think. So we have city ID, let's pass a region. I think the city ID is actually London. So let's use like 1, 2, 3 again. Let me run my server and now my client. Oops. Bloop. Run root main class client main. So yeah, this failed. Of course it did. And we got a city not found error. Well, guess what? The way to handle that is kind of the same as how we raised it. We raised it with IORaise error, so it would be only natural to handle it with handle error from cat effect. So let's say we have handle error with, and if it's not found, city not found error, I'm just going to print the reason. And do IO unit, which is basically just what I'm doing with the handle error with. And now if I run that again, it's handled and printed. So that's how it works. So clearly the server and client, when they work with errors, they don't really know that they're doing HTTP, right? It's kind of hidden under the hood for you, which is what I would call a good thing, because when the representation of the error changes or the protocol changes, you don't have to change your code. You just change your spec, and then the client and the server are automatically in sync when they get compiled, when they generate code for the Smithy spec. There's one more thing, like what happens if you raise an unexpected error, something that, you know, you just forgot to catch an error from an upstream service. So let's say I raise error, new illegal argument exception, whatever. Now, if I raise that, it's not gonna look pretty, that's for sure. So it's an internal server error, but it's not JSON. It doesn't have a body. It's certainly not this internal server error. So how do we do that? You can set a global to your service exception handler in your builder. So you can say map errors. So I'm going from an exception to an internal server error. Let's see what that looks like. So that behaves correctly on my particular error because it's an illegal argument exception. Let me see with city not found out error and just no fields at all. Yeah, it keeps this error as it was before. However, a caveat here, you have to make sure that internal server error, this one, is common to all your operations. It's common to the whole service, ideally. Nobody checks this for you. If you use an error that is different, something like city not found error, and you call an operation that does not have it, then Smithy will not know how to serialize it, and it'll just do the generic thing that I think we saw sometime before. So it's just gonna be like an empty response with not even a JSON type. So yeah, that's kind of what you get. And there's still another caveat to this, which is when you send a request that's valid, everything's fine. But if you forget something, then you get an internal server error. because we caught all the errors, all the throwables. And it turns out that this allows you to also capture errors that come from the client, like bad request error. For example, here I missed a required field, and that actually gets sent here. So if I log my exception, let's say we have, I'm just gonna do e print stack trace. This is a side effect, but yeah, forgive me for that. You'll see metadata error not found. And yes, you can avoid this by doing e if e is not instance of metadata error. So if I do this, I should be safe. Yeah, so I just get the default behavior here. But this does give you the ability to control this response so that you can make this conform to the Smithy spec. So let me go through the caveats again. The caveats of map errors. There's also flat map errors, so the same thing except you can return IO. For example, if you're logging things, that would be what you would do. So caveat number 1, you have to make sure that this type, whatever you handle to, has to be a common error type of all your operations in that service. Second of all, you have to make sure that you don't accidentally catch metadata error here. Otherwise, you'll turn 400 into 500 and you probably don't want that. So I would recommend doing something like this. Actually, in real life, you would do like flat map errors. And this would be something like, oh, what would I do? IO pure with something like a logger here, logger error E. Something like this would get you a long way. So yeah, that's it. These two caveats, I think you should keep them in mind. And last but not least, I want to show you what if you actually want typed errors in your Smithy4s services. So you can say, this is a weather service, error aware, and now we need an effect type that is able to handle errors. You can use either T, you can use IO with either, you can just use either, or some effect type like a Zio IO, I think, has 2 type parameters. So you can use something like this, and it doesn't really matter what it is as long as you can convert back to an IO of this shape. So I'm going to use result EA, that's gonna be covariant, that's gonna be IO either EA, and that's gonna be my result here. Now I have to change things everywhere. So it's going to be either get weather error or get weather output. That's gonna be a write. And yeah, the types don't align because I expect a weather service, but I have a weather service error aware. So I'll need to convert it with transform. And now we have to pass a function. I think it's transformation absorb errors. And that's gonna go from result to IO. Let me just confirm that. So first transformation, absorb error. Yeah, that's it. So it's not very IDE friendly, to be honest, but it does work. So yeah, I'll need to absorb the error. And that's gonna go from result to IO. Let's see. Oh yeah, this one also has to be changed. So it's result create city error. I'm not even sure if it exists. Maybe I can just use nothing here. And now my transformation. So I need to go from my IO of either to just an IO. So you have to implement this strange callback. You get this inject error thing. So I'm gonna have to flat map. In case of a left, I'm gonna call IO raise error, inject error E. And in the right, I'll just do pure. And yeah, that's basically how you achieve typed errors. So you have this IO either or just result. So I actually cheated here because I have raise error. You're not supposed to do this. What you should do instead is IO pure left. So that actually is type checked now. It's failing because because of the union thing that I mentioned before. So get weather error, city not found error. You have to actually wrap things yourself. Otherwise, Smithy4s doesn't know that city not found error. It doesn't automatically convert from this to that, from city not found error to get weather error. There is one more thing that you can apply in Scala 3, which is called errors as unions. This only works in Scala 3, but it allows you to generate this get weather error as a union type of all the errors that appear in this particular operation. So then you would not need any extra wrapping. This left would just work thanks to subtyping of union types in Scala. But because it's only Scala 3 and it's not everyone's preference to use union types, it's not the default. On the client side, we can also use transformations. I'm gonna copy paste this result type, and we're gonna need a transformation that's the opposite of absorb error, because this kind of moves the error from the typed channel to an untyped channel. We're gonna do the opposite. So we're gonna do, well, I think it's surface. So surface error, and let's see the types here. And you go from a functor to a bifunctor, so from IO to result. I think this would be a recover with as well. Case, yeah, this should do. There are better ways to write this, but I think this should work. And in other cases, just raise. What's the problem now? Oh yeah, the problem is that in the successful case, we still need to convert to a result. So we need to map in and lift into an either. So that works. I think in Scala 2, you may need some more type annotations here, just saying. But this works in Scala 3. And now I still haven't combined this with anything else. So we can do this here, like right before the call, or I'm gonna do it here in the map on the resource. Just transform the client with surface. And now your client creates city, returns an either, and that's typed again. So in this case, I would need to handle the errors, because instead of a success, I'm dealing with an either. So something like either t, let's try that. Flat map like this. Yeah, this would also be easier to deal with either t. Other with, no. Oh, I guess I'll need to import. Finally, I can import cat syntax all. And I lift this in either t, lift f. And it's probably because of a t. And now I'll run this either t. Everything should hopefully work. It's complaining because it's a get weather error. So we would need to do get weather error, city not found error case. That's kind of how you handle these typed errors, right? So this is not exhaustive, of course, but I think I can use for that recover with. Yeah, so again, that's how you can do this on the client. It would probably be more convenient if I made result and either t in the first place, and if we had the Scala 3 as unions feature enabled, but I don't. This is all I have. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.